Mr. Krastev, the 9th of November 1989. You were 24 years old. Where were you?
I was in Sofia. Being Bulgarian, I was in a restaurant. The interesting story is because I was listening also to your pandemic discussion. 1989 was a type of epidemics too, but a positive one. It was basically the infectious epidemic of freedom where suddenly, every week, something is happening in Central and Eastern Europe.
The infection of freedom.
Yeah.
Yes, it was, of course, the date the wall fell,
yeah.
The Berlin Wall. And it was regarded, is still regarded as a decisive moment in human history. Like the end of the Second World War, this was such a date. Decisive, and the general opinion was that with the disappearance of the Berlin Wall, Western liberalism, democracy had won. But this is something you do not agree with in this book.
Listen, it goes even slightly more complex because first something incredible happened. And don't forget, the things that shocks us most is things that we did not expect. And this was about 1989. Basically, people knew that communism in the long term is doomed, but nobody knew how long is the long term. And from this point of view, this was interesting to see it from a place like Bulgaria, because Bulgaria was not Poland. Even in the mid-1980s, communism was stable as nature. The same day, November 10, when the Bulgarian communist leader, Todor Zhivko, who has been running the country for 40 years, resigned, I remember being in the restaurant in Sofia University. The leader of the opposition, then there was no opposition, came and talking to us, and he said, "You're young people, you're going to see the end of communism." 6 months later, he was the president of the country. So suddenly, in weeks, things started to change very much. And then two things happened. One is, because something that we did not expect, the end of communism, happened, we started to believe that we know what is going to happen in the future. When we have been, by the way, writing the book, we figured out that the most wise thing being said about 1989 was said by a person who was not famous for wisdom. Back then, the vice president of the United States was a person called Dan Quayle. And he was the favorite of the stand-up comedians.
Dan Quayle,
yeah,
he was, absolutely,
all
yes.
The gaffes. So then in 1989, he said the following. He said, "What we witness today is an irreversible trend towards more democracy and more freedom. But of course, all this could change." And paradoxically, what we see is there was the irreversible trend. And basically, we see the trend changing. And for us, the major
So Dan
question...
Quayle was right for a change.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Listen.
but let's try and grab this, because there's a lot of psychology in your analysis.
Yeah.
How the Eastern, Mid-Eastern world, Mid-Eastern European world looked at the West. And what you're saying in your analysis is that the concept of imitation is very important here. In what way? Listen,
there was one key word in Eastern Europe in 1989, and this was the idea of normality. If you're going to ask people what you want to be, they said, "I want to have a normal life in a normal country." And the normal country was Western Europe, Netherlands, Germany. So suddenly, if before kind of the future was ahead in time, suddenly the future was next to you. Mm-hmm. And basically, imitating the institutions, the way of life, was what East Europeans, this is what we wanted. Because we simply wanted to have the life like in the West.
Yes, but this didn't persist. I mean, there was a certain moment where the imitators felt, wait, is this the right way to go?
Yeah, I do believe that there's three things that basically explain the current kind of a change of mood in some of the countries is, first, listen, the idea to imitate the West was our idea. But it is very difficult to be an imitator in a cultural environment that tells you all the time how important it is to be unique and original. So being an imitator psychologically is not an easy position.
Because?
Because if I want to imitate you,
yes,
I recognize that you're better than me. And
otherwise you wouldn't
exactly.
imitate me.
Secondly, what is critically important is East Europeans have been imitating the model that have been changing all the time. The really existing West is not the same in 2019 in the way it was in 1989. So put yourself in the shoes of a conservative Pole in 1989. What was the West for him? Okay, it was anti-communist. It was people who loved to go to church. And basically, it was about family values. It's not exactly how the West looks to him today. So from this point of view, imitating an ever-changing model created a problem. And plus, the financial crisis, and before it, the wars in Iraq and others, created in this society the fears that something could be wrong with the model. So it is not that you are unhappy of what is happening necessarily in your own country. Don't forget, economically, some of the Central and East European countries were very successful. For example, the GDP of Poland in the last 30 years tripled. Even the social inequality has declined in the last decade. More than 70% of the Poles persistently claims that they are happy with their individual life.
So with all this success, there's no need to imitate anymore.
And then comes the story, probably, we don't need to imitate. Probably now they're going to imitate us. Because in this world, to be successful means to be imitated.
Yes. Still, the success, or maybe let's say this moment that the wall fell and this process of imitation started, it also meant that a lot of people, for the first time, had the opportunity to go to the West. So they left their own country. What is the effect of that?
No, this was the most underestimated effect when people try to understand, particularly the support of some of the populist countries in populist parties in Central and Eastern Europe. Listen, when you go to the opinion polls today and ask East Europeans what is the best that happened to you after 1989, they're going to tell you the opening of the borders. When you're going to ask them what you fear most, this is the opening of the borders. And this is not simply the fear of the people coming. This is also the fact how many of your own natives get left. Just give you one figure in order to understand the scale we are talking about. Romania is a country of around 21, 22 million people. This is the second biggest after Poland of the Central and East European countries. Only between 2007 and 2017, 3.4 million people has left the country, 70% of them younger than 40.
And probably also the best educated.
Listen, it's at least the most risk-taking. And so you have the period of depopulation, which was very much based on the low fertility rate and strong out-migration, which basically, for example, in a country like Bulgaria, basically in 1989, around 9 million people were living in the country. Now they're around 7 million. If you trust the demography projections, in 2040, they're going to be 5.7 million.
Okay, enough statistics. But what you're actually saying is that when these borders opened, many people went to the West. Because there, it was more attractive. There, they could earn more money. There, they could do what they wanted to do. Or was there something else?
For different reasons. And also, don't forget, if the West is the future of the East, what is about revolutionary people? They want to live in the future. So people just wanted some went for education, some for the experience. So in a certain way, this movement from the East to the West very much resembles the movement from the rural areas to the cities in 60s and 70s.
How do you relate to this matter? Because you were born in Bulgaria, and you live now in Vienna, so you left as well.
For sure. Listen, normally people write about things that they know best.
So do you.
And this is the story. Our generation benefited incredibly from this opening. In 1991, I had not been traveling basically to the West before, in 1990, like most of the Bulgarians. So in 1991, basically I get the fellowships to go to Oxford. After that, you have been going to different places. So for our generation, the fact that the border was opened was an incredible success. But then if you're going to see from the point of view of a person who is still there, you're going to see that if 10 or 15 years ago, they said, okay, people were living, there was a high unemployment in our countries, this was the way to survive the transition, and the remittances money have been very important for the economy of the countries.
But how do you feel about leaving your own country?
Well, listen, there is always a kind of a sense of guilt. I have benefited a lot. I left recently late. I have been for the last 10 years, and I spent 3 months every year in Bulgaria anyway. But imagine the kids that basically are living just after finishing their school.
Yeah.
These kids will go, they're going to have a very interesting life. They're going to marry somewhere. Most probably their kids are not going to speak Bulgarian anymore. One of the most important things to understand the crisis is to try to see the crisis through the eyes of the grandparents who are living alone somewhere in a small town or village which is abandoned, and they don't have a common language with their grandchildren.
Yeah. So maybe your parents or grandparents, I'm not sure whether they're alive or not, but if you pose this point, how would they feel about, I'm not trying to criticize you on this, but I'm just trying to understand, how would they feel about you leaving Bulgaria and maybe not being able to communicate with you anymore, or with your children?
No, listen, in a certain way, this is this ambiguity, which is also the reasons why this problem came so late in the discussion. On one level, of course, my parents are happy because living in Vienna, probably I wrote a book which I was not going to write. Living in Sofia, at least it was not going to be translated into Dutch, for sure. But then you're missing the fact that your kids are not around, and also the country is missing the critical mass of people. And keep in mind something very important. If you are very successful, but living in a place where many of your friends want to live, your success is not the same.
All right. Having spoken about this, and having read your book, and having understood the process of imitation as you describe it, what then is the key in understanding the rise of populist authoritarian leaders like Orban in Hungary?
There are many things. One of them is the demographic panics. And this is the feeling that you're living in a society which basically is depopulated, that it can disappear, that nobody understands you, and you're basically against the world. And as a result of it, some of Central and East European societies have the same problem that GDR had in 1961 when the Berlin Wall was built. Young people on working age living. So in order to stop your own living, you should try to demonize the West. You should try to say, don't go there. It's not as good as you believe.
But you see in countries like Hungary and Poland that judges, that independent media, that education are under pressure. Is this a new future, or is this a return to the past?
Well, listen, for me it's first quite important to understand that when we talk about populism, this is not simply East versus the West. Look at Germany and you're going to understand that basically the dividing lines are within every society. The dividing lines are very much between the big metropolitan cities and the countryside. Warsaw, Bratislava, Budapest, Prague, all of them has a liberal mayors, and all of them has a populist governments. If you're going basically to see this dividing line, you're going to see also in many of the Western societies. So the major divide in Europe, unfortunately or fortunately, is not simply between East and West. There is a major transformation of our societies. I don't believe that Hungary and Poland are going to be the model for Europe for one very simple reason. East European societies are ethnically extremely homogeneous societies. More than 90–95% of the people being from the same ethnic group. This is not how the Western Europe and the rest of Europe works today.
No, no. You say that in an earlier interview, Europe consists of people who have never experienced the collapse of a system and people who have. Now, is that a way of thinking in, I mean, you say that a rapid collapse of a system is very conceivable. We saw that in 1989. Yeah. Is that, how do you, in that light, see the future of the European Union?
Listen, seeing in the future is not easy. But I can tell you something that is a major dividing line between East and West, how we experience the crisis of the European Union. Because of their life, most in the West Europeans take European Union for granted. They believe that there are crises, but crises are going to be overcome. What we know in Eastern Europe is that everything political is very fragile, and nothing should be taken for granted, including the European Union.
Thank you very much.